Okay, so the second thing that I want to talk about is heavy-handed preaching, getting flogged, never feeling good enough to experience the goodness of God. Never. No matter what I did, what I tried to do, what I abstained from, nothing was ever good enough. The environment that I was in preached really hard. So if you go back and listen to my old music, a lot of my old music is really hard. I realized that was because a lot of us didn't know how to experience the grace of God. We didn't know. And that's because grace had never been shown to us in a practical sense from other people. We didn't know what it was like to just be accepted for who we were. Like, it was very performative, the space was. I remember one time I left the church. I was like, yo, I'm burnt out. I'm not coming to church for a little bit. And I ended up stumbling on the teachings of, what was his name? His name was Tullian Chavidian. He was like Billy Graham's grandson. And at the time he was a really prominent preacher. And of course, kind of like some stuff happened. He ended up falling out of ministry or whatever. But at the time, he was really, really big into grace. And I'm listening to these sermons of his like faithfully because I'm experiencing like, I'm hearing about the grace of God that covers sins, that's loving, that's inviting, that replenishes, that restores, like the power of grace. And I'm like, yo, like, really? I have access to this word? And then I would go back to that space and grace teachings. And here's the other thing, like grace teachings during that time were really prominent in white church spaces. And so I would go back and I would talk about that stuff, or I would share it, and like it would get frowned upon. And, the feedback that I would get was that it was watered down. It's like, yo, somebody preaching about the grace of God is watered down? Really? We were at a point to where every time anybody preached, well, not anybody. No, let me take that back. Not anybody. Anytime the heavy hitters preached, if you weren't on the altar at the end of the sermon, you were considered disobedient. The word had to convict you in such a way that you had to have this Shekinah glory, will your heart and soul say yes, ministry moment. Every week, my nigga. Every week. And it's like, yo, people falling out, people crying, giving stuff up to God. At least in their mind they are, but like, you back up here next week. Or we're in church twice a week, and you at the altar Thursday and Sunday for years, 3, 4, 5 years straight. You doing this every week. And that's the accepted response. Like, wait a minute. So did you get free in this area? Have you experienced some type of like breakthrough? And what have you done? Because here's what would happen. See, have you experienced any type of freedom? Because I tapped out. After a while, I was like, this is not the way. This is not the only way to give something to God. Sometimes giving stuff up to the Lord is through conversations. It's through community. It's through therapy. It's through changing habits. It's through abstaining from stuff. It's through all different types of things. And one thing that the church space shunned was therapy. It was one of the spaces where the pastor was the therapist. And it's weird because with me, he was like, after a while, he was like, yeah, maybe you need to go to therapy. But some of my other friends who were in the space, I would tell them like, hey, you should probably go to therapy. And they'd be like, well, pastor said I shouldn't go, or this person said I shouldn't go. Because leadership would, because I told y'all earlier that like boundaries were really bad and they were poor. So leadership would also try to serve as counselors, as therapists, psychologists, social workers. It's like, nah, nigga, you a pastor. You know what I'm saying? You're a worship leader. Like, you're not any of those things. Like, those take degrees and information and years of practice. Those aren't things that the Lord just calls you to and you all of a sudden have all of the resources and wherewithal to operate and function in that space 100%. You can't. So what happened is they would disguise therapy sessions as discipleship. And so you would you be on the altar and you cry out and you feel like you would have this like supernatural experience with God. And then you would have a follow-up meeting with whoever the person that was assigned to you in the discipleship space. And you would like, they would follow up. So, hey, what happened on Sunday? What was that experience like for you? And you feel like because the space is safe that, you can tell them what happened or what you're dealing with or what you're falling short in. But the thing about, some small spaces, because this ain't even a church, like not even, this doesn't just apply to churches, but just in small spaces, like things get out. And so you think you've told one person and come to find out now 4 other people who have nothing to do with your process now know your dirty laundry. And I think one of the spaces and one of the reasons because of that was because having relationships outside of that particular church bubble was frowned upon. It wasn't direct. They would use language like, well, be careful. It's like, I've lived around the world. I've seen so many things. If anything, I'm too careful. You know what I'm saying? So why do I have to be careful in this space with another Christian? Because you don't know him? You know what I'm saying? So, the problem was, and the problem with preaching hard, to get back to that, is that, my family wasn't very affirming. Like, I didn't grow up with that. So my family wasn't affirming in like real obvious ways. Like, my mom and my sister always treated me as like little brother, youngest son. So there was like oochie coochie baby, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was that kind of affirmation. My father didn't always know how to communicate at the time, like how he felt about me or any of that stuff. So I looked to it in various ways. The only things that I was affirmed in consistently were my ability to play sports, my ability to rap, and my ability to communicate with the opposite sex, which then also leads to sex. So then I come into this church space and I want that affirmation, this emotionalism, this space is high, it's all this stuff. And I'm opening up my Bible and I'm reading these messages on grace, and I'm reading these messages on, the love of God and these First Corinthians characteristics, 1 Corinthians 13, those characteristics of the Lord. It's not even connecting for me that I can experience that. It's not even connecting for me. So I can't even receive it. So I'm already used to the flog. I'm super hard on myself. So then when I get into an environment that's also hard on themselves, that also has, issues with their parents and, not receiving and rejection and not receiving, love in various ways, like they're going to flock to the flog too. So we all just getting flogged. And after a while, I'm like, Another red flag was that I would joke and be like, oh man, this Sunday was actually encouraging. And you're like, what do you mean? What do you mean this is encouraging? Like, what do you mean? I'm not always encouraging? No, you are not always encouraging. Like, more often than not, I leave feeling like I'm never going to get right with God. You know, another one of the things that they used a lot, the language was very much like if then in experiencing God. And it would use scriptures like, you know, if my people who call me by my name will turn away from their sin, then I will heal their land, right? If then. Not, and so when things would happen to me, when good things would happen to me, I would try to like track it to, okay, what was I doing right? Was I in my word? Was I praying? Was I fasting? Was I abstaining from stuff? Okay, cool. Now I can receive the blessings of God. And so then when you experience God's goodness just because he wants to do it, there always has to be a reason or something attached to it. You know what I'm saying? And that was hard to receive.